Welcome, Claire, and let's dive straight into the conversation. I think I'm very, very excited to have you, Claire. I was doing some research about your work, and I found out wonderful book called Simplifying Coaching.
Great.
That's a book, but I want to hear from you. I mean, so much of experience in coaching you have, Claire. Tell me, in simplified word, what coaching is for somebody who just does not know much about coaching.
Coaching is where somebody facilitates somebody else to do some good thinking.
Tell me more. I'm curious now.
So it's a conversation where the coach enables the other person to feel seen and heard and felt and get new insights into their own stuff. So to understand something in a way they didn't understand it before. So what I think is unique about coaching is that often we have conversations, dialogue. You and I are having a dialogue here, but often in a dialogue, it's about you and it's about me. In coaching, it's only about you or it's only about me. It's not about both of us. So I've now given you about 3 of my definitions of coaching, Harris.
Yeah. And I'm noticing it's about the person. I think the client, it's all about them, right? It's not about both of us. It's about, and then how is it a partnership then?
That is such a good question. How long have you got? It's a partnership because in order for that to work, we need to work together because I can't do coaching to you. We have to find a way of engaging in this dialogue together in a way that it does enable you to feel seen and heard and felt and to get new insights into your own stuff. Because otherwise, I'm transmitting. And that's not partnership, but it's also not giving you new insights. So I'm just going, you need to do this and this and this. And you go, oh, yes, Claire, I'll do what you tell me, but it won't make any difference. So that's an example of when it's not partnership, of when it's like transmission. There's a beautiful piece of work that came from David Rock, and I've been on holiday, so I can't. So David Rock and somebody Schwartz, and they talk about the fact that we can't make meaning for somebody else. Meaningful change is when something happens for me and that changes me. If you make change happen for me, it isn't meaningful. So there's something about the collaboration of the 2 of us together that supports the other person to get some really good stuff, which is a bit odd compared to other conversations in the world.
Right. And it's really about the person who you are coaching, they initiating that thinking and those actions that they want to take.
Yes. Right? Yes. So I like to call them the thinker. I don't think that's a perfect description at all. A lot of the coaching schools would say that's the coachee or the client. They're just a person. I'm just a person. But if you start just talking about people, it gets confusing because if you call everybody people, then you can't work out who you're talking about. But it is all about them. And we're not doing something to them. We're having a conversation with them. And what a beautiful thing that is.
Having a conversation with them, not to them.
Yeah, not at them.
Not at them. And then how do you also differentiate, Claire, between coaching and mentoring? A lot of people, I think, do not have that understanding of the difference between the two.
I think the thing that matters, Harris, is that they're not the same. And some people will affix one meaning to the other word. So one of those things is that I facilitate you to do some good thinking and you come up with the solution yourself. And the other one is I tell you some things that I've done. And you go, oh, yeah, that's a good idea. I'll do that. The best way of working with people, if you are mentoring, if you are offering something, is to work out what needs offering. So I would call mentoring the offering thing and coaching I'll just facilitate you to do some good thinking. But the most dangerous thing is a wise and beautifully skilled mentor and a hungry person who has come for mentoring, who hugely respects their mentor. And the mentor goes, let me tell you everything I've ever learned. And the person who's being mentored goes, tell me. And at the end of the conversation, the person who's being mentored goes, that was amazing. But it doesn't make any difference because all you've done is you've received all this beautiful wisdom, but you can't put it into practice. So I think that the art of great conversation is that if you're my mentor, You help me work out which bit of you I need, would like, which bit of your wisdom is going to be useful today, and what am I going to do with that, rather than me just have this tsunami of wisdom that feels lovely and doesn't make any difference.
Right. It's not about just telling everything as a mentor. It's really about what will serve the mentee and the need. You call it offering, right? Yeah. Offering. Claire, tell me about Simplifying Coaching, the book that you've written. A little bit background about that and anything that you would like to share with our listeners.
I was never going to write that book. I really was not going to write that book. And I had many conversations with people about how I wasn't going to write it. So it came out in 2020, Simplifying Coaching. I ran a course. I started running a course in 2003. So 22 years ago, which was called Coaching for Excellence. But I didn't like the coaching word. And I thought it was more broad than that. So changed the name of it to Transforming Conversations. And it was basically teaching people about how to use coaching, how to do the least that they needed to do for the other person to feel seen and heard and felt and get new insights into their own stuff. And we still run it. We've run it online and we run it on site. We run it with people around the world. And the course had handouts. And I didn't want to publish a book because it was hard work and because I had distilled the principles of coaching into a series of images, of postcards. And every year or so, I'd realize that they weren't quite right. So I'd take one of the pictures out of the set of postcards and put a different one in, and nobody noticed. Because as we learn, we want to communicate something in a different way. So the disadvantage of writing a book was that you put the last full stop in the last page, and then you send it off to the publisher, and then you can't change it. That is the book. And then I was approached at a conference by a publisher, and she said, "Have you got a book you'd like to write for us?" And I said, well, I suppose I have. And the title that had been in my mind for years before was Simply Coaching, which I thought was nice and witty. And I said it would be called Simply Coaching. And she said, "That's a terrible title." And I said, "Oh, but I've been living with the idea of this title for years." And she said, "It can't be called Simply Coaching because people won't know what that means." We can disagree, but we'll come back to it. So I wrote the book in about 8 months because actually it was inside of me and it was in the handouts for the course. And so I took the handouts for the course, put them all into one document, took what was inside of me and wrote the book. And then it went to the publisher as COVID hit the UK 20. And then it came out during that pandemic time. And that was just the most extraordinary opportunity for me because everybody was at home on their computers around the world and people like you were saying, "Will you come on our podcast?" And I was going, "Yeah, sure, here I am." And so now my copy of Simplifying Coaching is full of things that I don't like about it.
Okay.
And all the things that I teach slightly differently now because it's even more simple than it was when I wrote the book.
So are you planning a version 2 of the book? More simplified version? Yes.
And it will have another chapter in it because one of the things that's happened is that I hear people coaching and realize that they learned it from my book and I don't like it because people are taking literally, these are the questions that you ask to start having a conversation, but it doesn't sound as though the coach is listening to the other person. They're just asking these questions. And so the encouragement in version 2 will be to take the learning, to use it well and to make it a little bit softer.
And more natural, right? Not just the...
Yeah, so you'll be able to still see and feel the structure. You still won't start doing the work until you're clear what you're doing, but you will sound as though you were listening to the person who's talking to you.
Right. And I was also listening to you on one of the podcasts and you were talking about coaching agreement. ICF's establishing coaching agreement and maintaining agreement, the new competency 3 now. I really appreciated the way you explained it. Would you want to tell more? Because I think most of the time, coaches tend to get either too confused or just don't understand or take too much time and have a lot of confusions there. So what for you is coaching agreement in simplified version for you would be? So the coaching agreement is 2 different things, and that's why it gets confusing. That competency 3 is 2 things. One is working out the logistics of
how are we going to work together? How often? How many sessions? How long are they going to be? Who's paying? Is it confidential? The logistical stuff. And that really matters. And it's also working out what we're doing today. And I meet a lot of coaches, often quite advanced coaches, who think that if they got the agreement right before session one, they don't need to get it right today. They say, well, we know what we're working on. And I go, but you don't know what you're working on today. So in Simplifying Coaching, when I was writing it, I called that contracting. So I said, this is about the logistics, which is what you do before you start the relationship. And then you have contracting, which is what you do in each session. But those words are still too close together. So about 5 days before I had to send it to the publisher, I realized that contracting wasn't the best description, because what we're actually doing in every conversation is we're working out what we're doing, how we're going to do it, and how we're going to know we've done it, because we're making the work the right size for today. So now I say, well, there's contracting, which is the logistics, and then there's right sizing, which is working out what we're doing today. And that clarity really helps coaches. And I hope that will help your listeners get much, much clearer on the difference between one and the other, because you have to do both. And they're very different.
And one is for a long term, right? I mean, you don't really need to do every conversation, but for every conversation, you do contracting, right?
So you do right sizing in every conversation, yeah.
Tell me more. Why do you term it as right sizing?
So you come for coaching with me, Harris, and I say, what would you like to think about over time? And you say, I'd like to have a much more impactful life. So we're making a contract for the how we're going to work together over time. So you come to session one and I say, so we're talking about having a more impactful life. Harris, what would you like to think about today? And you say, I want to think about world peace. That's massive. So what coaches will often do is that they'll either say that's massive or they'll behave as though that's massive. And I'll go, Harris, we can't possibly talk about the whole of world peace. So let's pick a bit and talk about that first. So Harris, what do you think about world peace? So you now talk about world peace for the next half an hour, at the end of which I have a bit more information about what you think about world peace. You don't have any new insights because you have transferred information about your situation to me. And the more you transfer information to me, the more you think I'm going to do something with it. Now the coach feels under pressure. The other person hasn't started thinking. They have transmitted information to the coach. So right sizing is about neither maximizing the problem. World peace is a very big subject, Harris. We can't possibly do justice to it in our 1 hour session. So we maximize the problem when we minimize the time. What we need to do is we need to be normal and we need to work out which bit of that are we doing. So I'd love to say to your listeners, if you take one thing away from this podcast, the best coaching question in the world starts with which bit. So I say to you, what do you want to think about? You say world peace. And I say to you, so which bit of world peace would you like to think about in this hour? And you go, actually, I want to think about the impact I can have on world peace. That's still too big, I think.
Right.
So I would say to you, that sounds great, Harris. So in the hour we've got, which bit of the impact that you might have will be useful for us to think about? And you say, I want to do something significant. Great. That sounds so exciting, Harris. In the hour we've got, well, now it's 55 minutes. In the 55 minutes we've got, what is it that we need to think about your impact on world peace that's going to move that forward a bit? So what we're trying to do is we're trying to get clearer about the work for today before we start to do it. And that's right sizing. And that is what the ICF describe in competency 3, maintains and establishes agreement. But it's really confusing because it comes at the bottom of the list, where at the top of the list are things like fees and sponsors and
the logistics part of it.
Yeah. And they hide away the most important thing about coaching right down the bottom. And that's sad.
So right sizing is really about figuring out what's appropriate and doable in the session.
Yes, it's about figuring out what's useful in the session. And it's about making it something that we can achieve today. So the outcome question in coaching, which is there in the competencies, what would you like to be different by the end of this conversation? And you say, well, I want world peace. So by the end of the hour, how will you know? Yeah, which bit? Which bit do you want to have moved forward? So sometimes the right sizing takes a long time. Right. And the art, I think, of a really artful coach is not to panic, but also not to minimize or maximize. Because I hear coaches all the time either say or imply, we can't possibly do credit to your very big problem in this very short time.
And I think that is where the question of supervision, I think it's the right time we move in there. Right. You've been a supervisor for a long time now.
I have.
And you are supervising students and coaches who've been practicing for some time now. So what are the common challenges you find with these new coaches who come to you for supervision?
I think there's quite a big difference between new coaches and really experienced coaches. And I work with the whole breadth. So I think if we start with new coaches often come to coaching because they want to help people. And they are so excited, keen, committed to helping people that it can feel quite overwhelming because they get too close to the stuff. Because I have to show you all my special things and it's my responsibility to change your life. It isn't. Yeah. So when I work with coaches at the beginning of their journey, it's often about just encouraging them to back off a bit. There's a guy called Bert Hellinger who said, have no intention, especially to help. Coaches need to be useful. We need to facilitate other people to do good work. So early on in their coaching, it's often about encouraging people to take a little bit more distance in their coaching. Sometimes it's a combination of the impact that the relationship is having in the coach. And it's also about what's happening in the room, which the ICF would describe as mental coaching. So when I do supervision, I will often do a combination of those, which is, what's the impact of these things? And, what do you do when somebody comes to coaching and they want to talk about an experience that you've had? Because often your niche in coaching means that people will come to coaching with you and they will describe a situation that you've experienced yourself. And that might trigger you because you haven't settled it, or it might trigger you into telling them what you did, or more likely, because you've been told in coaching school that you don't keep what you did, it'll trigger you into asking them questions that accidentally tell them what you did. Yeah. Phrased as an open question.
Yeah. Yeah, that's about the new coaches, right? Yeah. And you said you also work with experienced coaches. And
that's interesting because I have a supervisor myself, of course. And one of the things that we talk about a lot in my supervision is how to keep it as coaching supervision and not as therapy, because I'm not a therapist. But often with more experienced coaches, it's much more about who they are. So when I wrote Simplifying Coaching, that's about the logistics of how we have a conversation. My other book, The Human Behind the Coach, is much more in the supervision space, which is about being courageous, being vulnerable, managing silence, being able to be in a conversation when you don't know what to do. Because the whole purpose of coaching is that we don't know what to do, but we think that they're paying us and therefore we do know what to do. So there's a lot of unusual opposites, I think, in the way that we work. I think you're paying me to know. I know you're paying me not to know, but then you're paying me, so surely I have to know. So enabling people to really have confidence in the process is part of, I think, the development of all coaches, whether we're brand new or whether we've been working for a long time.
Right. Yeah. And you spoke about silence. Yeah. I mean, I find new coaches really struggling with, handling silence. And they're like, I don't know, how do I work with that? So what are some of the tips and suggestions that you want to give around silence in coaching?
How long have you got? Silence is where the work happens. So silence is oft. So when I'm silent, often the person that I'm coaching, that's when they'll be doing their best work. And what one of our principles in coaching is don't interrupt the thinker thinking. And new coaches are really good at stopping the thinker from thinking. So the thinker, the person who's being coached, they look away and they start going, they start thinking things. And the coach asks them another question and they go, oh, what did you say? And instead of being in flow with their thinking, they're listening to the coach. I think there's something about our identity that actually says, I'm being paid. Because, this is an industry. I'm being paid for this person to feel seen and heard and felt and get new insights into their own stuff. I am not being paid to add value by saying a lot of words.
Right.
So the new coach will often talk for 30% of the time. Actually, we may only need to say one thing. And that unlocks everything, and then they do some great work. So I think starting from the assumption that I won't say anything unless it's useful, and that I will I will watch you thinking and only speak when necessary. And another of our principles is be silent and ask questions where necessary. But in coaching school, we've learned 1,000 great questions and we paid money. If you paid 1,000 whatevers, you paid $1, £1, £1 1 whatever for each question. So you want to use them, but you probably don't need to use any of them.
Right.
So start from the assumption that you don't need to say anything would be one thing. Another one is watch, because as the coach, your job is for the thinker, the other person, to think.
Yeah.
And while they're thinking, you don't need to speak because you're doing a really great job.
Yeah. And it interrupts the thinking pattern of the thinker.
Yeah.
And the question may not be even relevant in that moment.
Yeah. So we also need to stay in sync. Because when in the silence, the thinker, the person who's receiving the coaching, will have moved forward probably. And now the coach is behind them.
Yeah.
So any question that you've got, even if it's the best coaching question that anybody has ever had in the history of coaching, and even if it was completely original and it emerged in this conversation, it has to go in the garbage because they've moved past it. And that is really annoying, especially if it was a really fantastic question. But we have to just drop it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not useful for the client, so it's just not.
No. We sadly have to go, okay, that's not for here.
And Claire, thank you for all the insights so far. And you've used this word a couple of times that in coaching conversation, it's about making the other person, make them feel heard and seen, right?
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit more on that. And I think I do understand what are you saying when you're saying seen and heard, but what's felt here?
I think that's different for everybody. And I think I want to encourage you and the viewers and listeners to think about a time when you can really say in that conversation, I felt seen and heard and felt. Because that's not somebody going, I hear you saying something about this. Or it's not about somebody paraphrasing back to you what you've just said. So, for example, you say to me, I'm your coach, and you say to me, I've had a really crazy life. By the time I was 25 years old, I'd lived in 5 countries. I'd lived in wherever I lived, 5 countries. And I say back to you, by the time you were 25, you'd lived in 5 countries. You will not feel seen or heard or felt.
Right.
Because you know that. And if I list off the 5 countries that you lived in, you go, yeah, I know that. Being seen and felt and heard might be me simply saying, that sounds like a lot of change. Or, wow, I wonder how that felt. Or, I wonder what that means about friends. Or, I wonder what that means about belonging. Or anything. But it's when we feel like somebody really understands us. I had a conversation with a professional the other day about myself, and they said, I wonder whether, and they were so spot on. I have never felt as seen as I did when that person said that thing. Now, they weren't a coach, but there was something about, I felt they got me.
Yeah.
And that's such a gift that we bring to the world. And it's such a gift that we bring to the conversations that we have. It's extraordinary But that's not what it says in the listening books. The listening books say, well, I say to you, so Harris, you've lived in America, you've lived in the UAE, you've lived in Singapore, you've lived in the UK. And you go, yeah, no, yeah, I have.
Yeah.
And?
Yeah.
Whereas if I say, so I worked with somebody yesterday for the first time, and I said to them, I wonder, as you're telling me your story, I'm just wondering about belonging. And they went, yeah, but it's an art. And this beautiful thing we do that's called coaching takes a lifetime. And we don't get it right all the time. I don't get it right all the time.
Yeah. And hence I feel that, you were referring to the conversation that you had with somebody who is not a coach, but made you felt, as if you've been seen and heard and felt. I think if you all can just learn coaching and get it right, I think for any conversation, I think we can just make those conversations very transformative for anybody. And hence,
do that, we've got to hear the mood as well as the content. And I think that's where coaches are often, particularly early on, are weaker at hearing the mood. So what do we sense in the way somebody's talking about something is just as important as the content of what they say. And we haven't talked about AI, artificial intelligence, but the sophistication of the way that the AI bots can ask questions. If we're going to be successful coaches, particularly if you're young into the coaching profession, you've got a long time to go in terms of how long you want to work for. We need to be refining the art of being deeply human and being able to really increase the sensing of what's going on, because the bots, the apps, the coaching things will be able to ask the same quality questions that we can,
right?
If not better.
Yeah, it's just a sensing which I think will be different, right? AI cannot get to really understanding the senses of the person, the feelings of the person that a human can understand and relate.
Yeah, and it's not about even understanding, I don't think, is it? It's about noticing. And it's about really developing those skills. I was talking to a group today earlier on and saying that for me, the piece of work that I want to develop, and I'll be writing about this year more, is about looking, noticing. Noticing is the fundamental number one most important skill of the coach, whether you are face-to-face, either on Zoom or in real life, or indeed if you're working on audio, because you can still see with your eyes closed. But that deeply noticing what's going on is the thing that really distinguishes the beginner coach from the artful coach who's really got this, mostly, except when they haven't.
I think it's also about experience and living your own fears and doing it wrong and then getting it right. I think it's just a process of self-development. And I think we all go through the same process and then get there. Of course, not everybody. It takes some time.
And sometimes I think we get so attached to our craft that we don't ever get there. So, I am going to find the best 1,000 coaching questions in the world. The best coaching questions are the ones that we can never use again, because they were so specific to what we saw or heard or sensed in the moment that they can't ever be used anywhere else again. Those are the best.
They come in the moment, right? I mean, just observing and noticing everything, and they come in the moment, right?
Yeah.
And let's talk about AI. I think you just mentioned that we've not spoken about AI. How do you see that? I mean, a lot of people say, is it going to replace coaches, or how do you think it's going to help and support us as coaches? AI?
Well, I think it is going to replace lots of coaches.
Okay.
And I think the question is, how do we speed up the development of human coaches to really embrace the not knowing, the noticing, the silence, all those other things that we've talked about today, so that the offering of the human coach is actually very different from the offering of the AI coach. I think the industry will change.
And it is changing, I'm sure. I'm coming in. Yeah. And in fact, somebody was talking to me and saying that I prefer AI than a human, because then I don't feel shameful about what I'm speaking. So it's not a human.
Yeah. So I think on one level, we don't need to fear it. But I think that in order to not fear it, we have to say, what are the things that I need to develop in myself and in my humanity that set me apart from the AI bot that can ask questions? Because it can ask really great AI, but there's more information in the space between us than the words that you say and the words that I say.
And hence, irrespective of how much development in AI can happen, I think human cannot be replaced.
Yes, as long as we really bring the human into the space. So I wrote, I'm preparing to do a talk for the UK ICF, and I wrote down this morning, for you to be you, I need to be able to be me.
For you to be you, I need to be able to be me. Okay.
So Timothy Clark, who wrote the 4 stages of psychological safety, he says, he talks about the first mover obligation to be vulnerable. So he says that in order for you to be vulnerable, so if we're in coaching, for it to work really usefully, for it to be at its best, the thinker needs to be vulnerable. But he says that for that to be safe, the coach also needs to be vulnerable. So we don't know what to do. So I've come into this conversation with you today. I don't know how to have this conversation with you. I hadn't prepared. I hadn't thought these I want to talk about, because we have to work that out together. But that requires an enormous amount of courage and trusting that you and I will work this out together. And that's also true in the coaching space. And I think that often a coach is feeling so much performance anxiety or concern about status or concern about difference or whatever, that it's really difficult to actually be fully ourselves. So I was working with somebody for the first time recently, and they were telling me about somebody they'd worked with before. The person I'm working with is from a different culture from me, and they were telling me what they'd appreciated about working with somebody from a similar culture. And I just said, I need to acknowledge that I'm white. You know, that's taken a lifetime of courage to do. And that was the unlocker. That made a significant difference to the quality of the rest of our conversation, because I had to be courageous enough to name that we're not the same,
right,
in order for us to be able to get to good work. And that requires vulnerability in me.
Right.
Now, you could say, well, of course you're white. You look white. But there's also something about having the courage to say things, but also to say them in a way that doesn't make it about me. So often we oversay. Well, Harris, I probably need to say that I'm very sorry. I'm a white woman. I live in England, and that puts me in a very different cultural space to you. And, you know, that makes me feel whatever. That's too much.
True.
So knowing what's enough and what's too much and getting that right is part of being vulnerable. One of the dangers in coaching, I think, is that the people we're working with think that the coach is sorted. And I kind of want you to think I'm sorted, because if you think I'm as broken as I am, then you're not going to think I'm very good.
Yeah.
But then if you think I'm sorted, then you're going to feel shame, which is what you described as the people who say I prefer an AI bot.
Right.
So how we be human. So you have a story, some of which will be fabulous and some of which will have been difficult. And some of that might be here in the present and in the past and in the future. I also have a story, some of which is difficult, some of which is beautiful and all of those things. And that's what we have in common, that we both have stories. You don't need me to tell you my whole biography, but you do need me to tell you that I'm not perfect.
Right.
In a way that you actually believe. And it's not my opening line.
And I think right sizing here again. Yeah. It's so applicable in anything that we do, right? I mean, keeping it appropriate and sufficient and enough.
Yes. And not too much.
Not too
Absolutely.
much.
Yeah. And enabling that the person that we're working with to trust us as a professional, but equally not to think that we're a perfect robot.
Right.
Because then we're back to being the AI bot again, aren't we?
Right. And I think as you progress in your journey of a coach, I think you realize that it's okay not to be okay with anything that you're working in a coaching conversation. And that not being okay becomes a new okayness in us as coaches.
Yeah. And not knowing what to do is a really great thing. But I think often we take control because we're afraid of something.
Right.
So the coach will take control of the conversation because they're afraid that they don't know what to do if they're not in control. So one of the things we talk about in the human behind the coach is not being in control and not being out of control. And in between those two things is a beautiful space to do loads of work.
And that takes time to figure out what's the space you want to hold.
Yeah, and it's different with everybody. And the people we coach, some people don't like that not knowing at all. I mean, we live in a world where we don't know anything. I mean, we know a lot of things and we don't know anything.
Right.
And, you know, that comes into the coaching space too. You know, what do they say? VUCA, volatile, uncertain, whatever, ambiguous.
Complex and
Complex, thank you.
Welcome. Yeah.
So that's also what comes into the coaching space. And we inhabit it as well. I inhabit it as a coach. The people we coach inhabit it in their space. So being able to hold that is really important. So one of the things I encourage coaches to do as part of their development is to stop learning things in their heads. You know, if you want to learn courage, go climb a mountain, go down the rapids in a canoe, go do something, because experiencing that lack of control in a safe enough way is actually one of the things I think that really expands our capacity to be great coaches.
Right. Yeah. Thank you, Claire. I think I got a lot of new insights in this conversation from you, Claire. Claire, thank you so much again. And I'm sure we're going to put your social media links on our YouTube channel in our comment section there, in description section. And any email address that you would like to share with our listeners that they can reach out to you for?
The best place to reach out to me is on LinkedIn. Claire Pedrick, MC. Yeah.
All right. So we'll put your LinkedIn link there, and we will have viewers reach out to you for more questions and insights and any conversation they would like to have. Thank you, Claire, for today, for the coming in and helping us learn from you.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.